Good afternoon. Today I'm joined by the Minister of Energy, Megan Woods, who will provide an update on the situation with power outages, and the Minister for Communications, Ginny Anderson, who will provide further information on the telecommunications network. Today we are getting a better picture of the damage across the upper North Island as power is restored in some places and cell phone coverage comes back on. What is clear is that the devastation is widespread and it's taken a toll beyond property and livelihoods to people. There have been 4 confirmed fatalities as a result of the cyclone. The grief of their families and loved ones will be unimaginable. In particular, I want to acknowledge the family of the volunteer firefighter in Muriwai, whose body was recovered today. He lost his life protecting others in his community, and our thoughts are with his loved ones. Today, our immediate focus has been undertaking life-saving missions for those affected by the floods who needed to be rescued, getting telecommunications and power back on as quickly as possible, conducting aerial surveys to understand the extent of the damage and to identify where people need help, deploying emergency supplies, food, water and medicine, and getting communications assets to the areas that need them. This has been an enormous logistical effort, ably led by NEMA and the New Zealand Defence Force. We remain in an urgent response mode in the Hawke's Bay region. There are 7 outstanding requests for evacuation. None have been identified as critical. All those who were on roofs have been rescued. More than 9,000 people are expected to have been displaced across the region, with 3,000 in civil defence centres. Police report that 1,442 people are unaccounted for, mainly in the Hawke's Bay, as at 2:30 this afternoon. 1,111 people have also been reported as found, and there is likely to be a crossover between those two numbers. We expect the vast majority of these people will be accounted for. However, there are several people missing for whom police do hold grave concerns. All local bridges between Napier and Hastings are out. However, access to Hastings and Napier has been re-established for emergency services and lifeline supplies via State Highway 51. Napier and Gisborne airports were able to open again today, and Air New Zealand, in coordination with government agencies, deployed a special assistance flight carrying communications support, emergency supplies and airport operational staff into Gisborne at midday today. The New Zealand Defence Force now has over 700 personnel involved in the relief efforts, which is an increase from the 239 they had yesterday. Included in that, there are 4 aircraft, 7 helicopters, 2 ships and 58 trucks. The Army have moved logistics support teams, a logistics support team of 100 people and 30 vehicles they are deploying to Hawke's Bay. 3 NH90 helicopters have been conducting evacuation operations in the Hawke's Bay today. The C-130 Hercules is conducting surveillance and reconnaissance along the east coast to survey the damage and provide better information on the area in need. The HMNZS Manawanui sailed at 5 p.m. tonight from Auckland with supplies destined for Tairāwhiti, and they're expected to arrive at first light in Gisborne. They'll be bringing with them water supplies to small communities along the way. The HMNZS Tamana will sail tomorrow with personnel to Napier, supplying Wairoa with water and other essential supplies. As you know, Wairoa has been an area of particular concern for us. Today we've been able to get a member of the National Emergency Management Agency on the ground to help re-establish communications. An NH90 has moved USAR and NEMA teams with emergency military communications into Wairoa. A rapid relief team is working to provide a drop of bottled water for 3,000 people via helicopter that is planned to arrive this evening. The rapid relief team will also be establishing a barbecue in Wairoa, which will cater for approximately 3,000 people this evening. They'll start cooking as soon as supplies land, and they will keep cooking into the night until either they run out of people to feed or they run out of food. They're aiming to provide 300 to 500 food packages tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning, the Defence Force will move a water treatment facility into Wairoa to supply drinking water, with the HMNZS Tamana delivering further drinking water, and a FENZ USAR team will also be on board to further assist emergency services. I know the need in the affected communities is great, and we are doing all that we can across a major response effort to get the support and supplies to where they are needed the most. I want to acknowledge the efforts of all those involved in what is shaping up to be a protracted response and recovery effort. I'll now hand over to Minister Woods.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Good evening. Well, as you all know, there's widespread impact from the cyclone on electricity infrastructure in the North Island. Companies are working to restore electricity as quickly as possible, and we're getting regular updates on progress. Since yesterday, 65,000 households across the North Island have had power restored. This means that as of 2:30 p.m. this afternoon, there are currently 160,000 households without power. This is down from the peak of 225,000 households yesterday. There are still high winds in some places with blocked roads, making restoration unsafe or inaccessible at this point. In some places, restoration may not be able to begin until later in the week when it is safe and it is possible to do so. Lines companies in unaffected parts of the country are working together to get crews to locations where they are needed and can help. And this involves transport logistics of both personnel and equipment. The government is assisting with this through the New Zealand Defence Force to get crew and equipment up to Northland in the first instance, and looking at what support will be required in other locations as we progress. I have also asked the electricity retailers to look at whether they have people and engineering expertise that can be helped with the effort to get power transmission restored. In Hawke's Bay, with the Radcliffe substation out of action, Transpower is working on a bypass to connect the Whakatu substation to allow more customers to get reconnected. This is obviously a significant event with a level of damage to our electricity infrastructure that we have not seen since Cyclone Bowler. I know there are many people who, on top of dealing with damaged properties and no power, and in some cases it will not be clear exactly when it will be restored, but we will keep information flowing as soon as it comes to hand. I acknowledge that this can be frustrating for people and it can be upsetting. In regard to fuel, the government has set up the Fuel Sector Coordinating Entity under the National Fuel Plan, which comprises fuel companies, retailers, MB and NEMA. This is giving a picture of open fuel stations in affected areas so that local civil defence emergency management can access fuel to undertake response activities as required. The issues are not about the supply of fuel, but a result of power being off at certain stations and or an inability to access them by road, meaning that vehicles can't refuel. Fuel companies are working to bring stations back online as fast as possible and working to restock where needed as roads open safely. Fuel is considered a lifeline service for priority access through roads as they open. There's a few other points on fuel. State Highway 2 to Napier has now been open to lifeline services, including fuel, which is allowing better servicing to that region. Mini tankers are loading at Napier and supplying emergency services with diesel as it is required, and Wiri Terminal and the Marsden Point Terminal remain open and operational. Stocks also remain at good levels at both sites. The Whangarei Harbour is of course opening today, and import ships are scheduled to arrive tomorrow. We understand that conditions are looking favourable for their berthing on arrival. And I'll now hand over to my colleague to update on telecommunications issues.
Thank you, Minister Woods. Tēnā koutou. The three main areas that have been impacted the most for connectivity are Northland, Coromandel and Hawke's Bay, with Hawke's Bay having Napier, also Gisborne having some impacts in that space. I'd like to acknowledge the fact that our telecommunications companies are working collectively to identify what assets and obstacles are in each of these areas. There have been 5 main breaks in fibre across New Zealand. 2 of these have been restored already. Coromandel has been restored this afternoon, and also north of Taupō has been restored. In terms of Northland, the main areas that we are focusing on is to increase the generator reach. So there will be generators in place to increase those cell phone towers that have not been operating. One of the main areas we're also focusing on for Northland is to get power back up so those cell phone towers can then be activated. In terms of Coromandel, now that we have fibre restored in that area, we expect connectivity to improve over the next 48 hours. In terms of Gisborne, there have been 2 major fibre outages going into Gisborne. There are intermediary measures being made with satellite and also generators. This will provide a limited connectivity for Gisborne in the short term. That means voice and text will be installed, but further ability to use the internet will require fibre to be installed. The communications providers are working now to provide an interim measure of overlaying fibre over land to restore fibre connection to Gisborne, and we anticipate this will take a couple of days to have it in place. In terms of Napier, we're continuing with generators to provide cell phone connectivity as quickly as possible. I appreciate people will want to get in touch with loved ones. I would like to confirm that the Telecommunications Emergency Forum has been stood up and is meeting daily in order to make sure we get people connected as soon as possible.
Before I open up for questions, I just have one further request from our emergency services, and that is to people who have been evacuated from their homes. Please don't return to your homes until you have been given the all clear to do so. Whilst the weather may improve in some areas and it may appear on the surface to be safe, if you haven't been given clearance to go back, there is a reason for that. So please don't do that until you've been given the okay to return to your homes, because we want to make sure that we are preserving the energy of our emergency services to supporting those people who are still being evacuated and to dealing with the issues immediately in front of them.
You said that police have grave concerns for several people still. Do you have a rough estimate of the number of people that they do hold those grave concerns?
No, several is the nearest that I've been able to get from the police at this point. They haven't given us a specific number.
How many, you said that there are 4 unconfirmed deaths. Is there a tally of, four confirmed deaths. Is there a tally of unconfirmed deaths?
Not one that I have at the moment.
And sorry, just going back to the people who they have great concerns, were there areas broken down where they are from?
In the Hawke's Bay primarily, they have some significant concern around the Hawke's Bay.
And in terms of, are you talking about Eskdale in particular?
That has been an area of concern. The New Zealand Defence Force report that there could be some concerns there from their reconnaissance and surveillance in that area. But look, at this point, I'm not going to share information that hasn't been confirmed, but clearly that's one of the areas that we'll be aiming to get better information about as soon as we can.
Do you have a handle on how much we don't know about the damage to property and possibly life in that area? It's
kind of a difficult thing to put it to quantify. There's clearly still quite a bit that we don't know. There are still some areas where we need to get more information. In some cases, we need to get people on the ground in those areas before we'll get a really accurate picture of that. Hour by hour, more information is coming in. As you'd imagine, in preparing for a press conference like this, information is still flowing in. So there may well be more information that we haven't yet heard because it is coming in on a regular basis.
There are reports.
Joe.
Where you said that the barbecue will be tonight there and they're expecting 3,000. Can we presume then that within Wairoa, people can actually get around, roads are open, people aren't don't have an ability, I guess, to get wherever that point is?
That's my understanding, but I might ask Roger to add to that.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Our understanding is that somewhere between 10 and 15% of the township was affected by flooding. We're not sure what the percentage is just at the current moment. Things may have receded a little, but there was no information to us to indicate that other parts of the town are inaccessible. But to be fair, we need to conduct a full assessment of the situation there, and that's one of the reasons why a USAR team has gone in to help with that reconnaissance.
So have you you haven't got the information back yet from that USAR flight? Is that what you're still waiting on?
The USAR is the Urban Search and Rescue, and they're boots on the ground.
Right.
But also, yes, no, there has been a reconnaissance by aerial means. So that's still being assessed. People are able to move around. Obviously, they're able to get to the civil defence centres and out again, and they're able to be attended to by the rapid relief team that's come in to provide some, food and so on. So, people are getting emergency support, and as the hours and days go by, that will increase.
So that 10 to 15% affected by the flooding that you said, is that people that can, I guess, get to the food and water, or is that people who don't have access in? Which one is that?
Look, at that stage, it was a pretty broad assessment of the size of the problem, rather than a sort of an accurate or a pinpoint number of how many people or square metres or anything like that. So obviously it's a significant inundation in the township, but those people are being looked after by civil defence locally, and external resources are coming, and we're putting in another 3 Starlink units tonight or first thing in the morning, for example. So we're feeling like we're getting a much better sense of the situation.
Could I have an update on the hospital in Hawke's Bay? It's obviously located in Hastings. Are those that need medical attention that may be based in Napier or North able to get there?
So the hospital is continuing to operate, although they have some staffing issues because not all staff are able to be at the hospital at the moment, but the hospital is operating. Acute care is available in Napier. The hospital teams have been working with primary care in Napier to make sure that there's acute care available in Napier. If people have a serious health issue, they should call 111, and through that they'll be able to get the best information on how they can access the acute care wherever it is that they are.
Prime Minister, are you familiar with reports that there are multiple bodies seen floating in Bayview? Are they credible?
No, I haven't got information on that. Sorry.
What do we know about the floodwater in that particular area in the Esk Valley there? Because it seems like a lot of the destruction centred around Wairoa.
If I heard the question right, it was, what do we know about the floodwater?
And what actually happened yesterday,
Yeah.
like how fast everything happened.
Look, thanks for the question. I can't speak to the specifics of any local action there from officials or from emergency responders. It was a fast-moving event, and we at the moment are entirely focused on supporting what is still currently, an operational situation, and evacuations are still going on. So I think we're going to need some time to sort of complete that, and then get some perspective on the operations as they played out.
And just on a couple of other remote communities that we didn't know much more about, Tolaga Bay, Tukumara Bay in Tauraki, do we know more about the situation in those communities?
I can't make a comment on that if you like, Prime Minister. Yeah, this morning we spoke to Tairāwhiti Civil Defence, and in the afternoon we were also online in a conference call with Chief Executive and Group Manager and so on, and other officials. So we've got a reasonable picture, and so do they. They have a very resilient and active remote network that's based on local civil defence, and their sense is that although they do have isolated and cut-off communities, that they're being well supported by their networks. And they have a local civil defence radio system and various other mechanisms. I think they feel the priority for them is water for the city, and the call to conserve that so they don't run the risk of running out.
In terms of the power outages and the telecommunications breaks that we've seen, can you talk us through I guess what occurred? Like we're talking about sort of floods washing away cables, or can you talk us through some of the issues there?
So there's multiple outages across multiple parts of the network across the North Island. So there's a range of factors. We know that at Redcliffe, for example, that it was a substation that got flooded. In other places, it's high winds that have taken down local distribution networks. So there's a range of factors that that are not unexpected in a weather event such as we just have gone through and that we'd see in various parts of the world in terms of what's happening. We've actually had engineers now being able to enter the site at the Redcliffe substation in the Hawke's Bay. That happened late this afternoon. We're still waiting a report on what damage is there and what it will take to fix. So in many cases, as the weather is subsiding, it's only now becoming clear what the damage is and what it will take to fix it, because of course there has to be a safe environment for staff to operate in. But I'm confident that the distribution businesses are working really collaboratively across different companies to make sure that we can deploy resource from around the country to where it is needed most.
Is it immediately apparent that any of these, this critical infrastructure is being built in places that potentially in the future with increasing events like this that shouldn't be there?
Well, I think that there have been questions asked about the Redcliffe substation, for example, but that was a substation that was built, I think, in 1927. So there probably were different considerations there. Of course, we constantly have to go back and look at the resilience of the infrastructure around our energy system. But the fact of the matter is that there were decisions made nearly 100 years ago in the case of some substations. These are all questions that we will have to go and consider very carefully. But at the moment, my sole focus is on getting power restored for people so they can get on with their lives.
Earlier in the day, the Emergency Management Minister was hopeful that the 25 outstanding rescues that needed to happen over in Napier would be completed today. There's obviously still 7 outstanding. Have they proved more difficult, and how protracted do you think this recovery and response is going to be?
The feedback that we've had is that those 7 that are still outstanding, all of the people concerned are safe. So the people who were on rooftops and in precarious positions have been rescued. Of course, there may have been more added. I don't have a number as to how many more have been added since then. But they'll keep going until they've got everybody safe.
And you said it was going to be a protracted rescue and response period. How long is this going to go for?
Look, we don't know. We know that there could be more. That there's more rain coming as well, and so that will complicate things because there could be additional incidents that get added to the tally of things that need to be responded to.
What is the travel advice in and around Hawke's Bay? Is it travel only for essential purposes still, and does that include checking on relatives, dropping food to relatives, dropping gas to relatives, or friends and family?
Of course, the advice continues to be to minimise travel as much as possible. Obviously, if people need to eat, though, and people's welfare needs need to be taken care of, so those who are doing that should do that responsibly.
And a question for the Energy Minister. How many people are without comms in the Hawke's Bay region?
Without power?
Without power, yeah, and communications in terms of like service and the ability to text, make calls.
So I'll answer in regard to power, and I'll ask Minister Anderson to update you on the comms aspect. So in terms of Hawke's Bay, there's 60,000 people without power. As I said, though, Redcliffe substation has now been accessed, and we're expecting a report from the engineers who were there later this evening. In Tairāwhiti and Wairoa, as at 2:30, there were 15,000 who were without power. But we're continuing to monitor that, and hopefully those numbers will come down even by tomorrow morning.
Ginny?
Just in terms of damage to the network, so the cell network is undamaged, so it stood up incredibly well to the force of the cyclone. So the main issue with cell phone towers is just getting power on, and as generators get put into place, more people are coming onto connectivity regularly right through those 3 main affected areas. In terms of fibre, there's 5 main breaks, and 2 of those have been restored, leaving only around the Gisborne area left. So we're using satellite and also generators to provide limited connectivity into Gisborne currently, and people are coming online as that satellite gets up in the next 24 hours.
There's a question down the front.
Yeah, Minister, are you concerned about the resilience of our communications infrastructure now that it's become so reliant on mains power? We've taken out all our copper, we don't have backup power systems. Is this a concern, given this is not going to be a one-off event, that these things will happen again?
Well, I think there's always room for emerging technologies and for us to be looking forward and how we embrace those as much as possible to make our country as resilient as possible in the face of increasing climate change events such as the one we've seen.
Just also to Mr. Anderson, in terms of the cell towers, does their ability, their battery life depend on the level of usage they get? If people text rather than call, does that extend the battery life? Or people use less data, does that extend the battery life?
So yes, they have been conserving energy in those areas where we want to maintain coverage. So they're replacing generators to ensure that there is coverage into those areas as much as possible. Those generators are fuelled by diesel, and we're working on the ground with Defence to make sure that we continue to supply fuel into those key areas.
But is there any advice to people in those areas to say, perhaps don't call? I mean, I remember after the Christchurch earthquake there was some advice to not call people because the towers the battery would deplete or something faster versus texting people to check up on them because that conserves battery more.
I've received no advice to that extent. People are able to use text and voice if they're required to check in with loved ones.
Sure. Just back on power, this morning the figure that Kieran McNulty gave was 144,000. Obviously it's gone up to 160. So are we going to continue to see over the next day or two numbers sort of move around a bit and potentially go higher?
The official number as at 2:30 was 100. Was the number that I gave, the 160. One of the things that we will be making sure is that we have regular reporting times, that all agencies will access the same data so that we can have that consistency of data that is going out. In terms of the ability to get that information in real time from the electricity distribution businesses or the lines companies, that's something we're working on. But obviously we want the resources of those companies to be deployed to reconnecting customers with power. So we're going to streamline the reporting processes around that, and we'll make that information available as well.
And Prime Minister, can I just ask, I don't know if you've heard any of the reports this afternoon from the Wairoa Mayor, who has been speaking to media, who was incredibly desperate sounding. Certainly this morning Kieran McNulty said that he had tried to reach the Mayor and hadn't had any luck. Can we assume that those calls from him were before things have been put in place, like the barbecue, like the drops of water, etc.? Have you spoken to the Mayor or what's happening?
No, I haven't. My understanding is he hasn't returned to the Minister's call yet, but the Minister is certainly keen to talk to him.
Is there a relationship breakdown for him to be speaking to the media but not returning the Emergency Management Minister's call?
Look, I wouldn't want to comment on that, but I would certainly say that I know the Minister has been trying to get in touch with the Mayor, and I would certainly hope that that communication channel can be opened up.
Just on that sheer number of people who have been displaced, we're already obviously in a housing crisis. We've got a massive emergency housing wait list. Where are we going to put these people? Are they going to have to move regions, or sort of what is the next step for these people who no longer have homes?
Coincidentally, we have the Minister for Housing here, so I might pass you over to her.
Thank you. And there is a range of ways in which we need to approach this, one of which we're working with our community housing providers in Kaingoa around our public housing stock in terms of our tenants there. We're also looking at housing assessments as they come through, but probably the most useful figures that we're monitoring are those people who are now accessing the temporary accommodation service, which is the emergency accommodation for people that are displaced. So we have 564 households in Auckland who are accessing the temporary accommodation service in Northland. As of this morning, there were 14 houses on the banks of the Awakino River in Dargaville and 400 households that were evacuated, but it's still not clear how many of those might be long-term displacements from those homes. It's only becoming clear on the East Coast what those numbers may look like, because largely we're still in the emergency phase where people are at civil defence accommodation, but that will become clearer. But we are very aware that this is the largest emergency housing project that the country will have ever had to undertake. It's larger than it has at this stage. The temporary accommodation service see that this will be a larger job than after the Christchurch earthquake sequence, and that was not insignificant. So it's something that we've got surge support within MB into our team that run the temporary accommodation service, and we brought that in over the weekend in anticipation that there would be increased demand in this area.
It's important to remember, it's also important to remember that not all the houses that have been evacuated will have been damaged. But I just want to reiterate my message earlier too, that even if people think their house hasn't been damaged, please don't return to it until they've been given the all clear to do that.
But so realistically, we are going to have sort of thousands of households who will now have to start living in hotels or motels.
I wouldn't like to get ahead of that number. I gave the number where we have had more time in Auckland, that they those displacements of people that are in the temporary accommodation service had largely came from the previous flood event, not the most recent one. And the number there is I think I've just closed that page off, but 400 and something people. I would not assume it's going to be thousands and thousands, but we are not underestimating the challenge that's ahead of us. We will continue to monitor and we'll continue to update the media around what that looks like. There's a range of options. Of course, in Christchurch after the earthquakes, that there were temporary accommodation facilities that were built for people to be housed in while their homes were repaired.
Prime Minister, these are pretty awful stories we're hearing. What emotions have you been feeling as you've been told them, and do you have plans to get into the regions over the coming days?
The answer to the last part of the question, yes, it is my intention to travel as soon as I'm able to, as soon as it's safe to do that, and as soon as my presence isn't going to detract from the immediate rescue effort. I don't want to be diverting resources to transport me around when those resources are required for the emergency response. So I'm on standby to do that, but obviously there's plenty of work to be done back here. In terms of my response to it, it is one of I guess gratitude to the first responders who are on the ground doing an incredible job, enormous empathy for those who are experiencing significant disruption, and resolve that we will absolutely get through this.
What are the immediate plans to get food and water into places that need it, where roads are closed? Presumably supermarkets can't restock?
Yeah, so as I've indicated, we have 2 naval vessels loading up. I think one is on the water now, on its way heading towards the east coast with water supplies, and another one will be leaving tomorrow morning. In addition to that, we've got work underway to get water purifiers, purifying equipment on the way so that we can stand up water supplies locally in those areas as well. And the Defence Force are working their way through that. The Defence Force are tasking very strategically and carefully to make sure that they're dealing with the most pressing needs first, and they'll work their way through. They've got a large number of assets on the ground, on the water, in the air, making sure that we're getting gear and supplies to the places that need them as fast as we possibly can.
So a lot of places are, a lot of people are reporting obviously missing loved ones online and that sort of thing. How is that information between maybe police, if they've reported someone missing, being fed with civil defence centres and things like that? Like if you've reported someone missing and they turn up at a welfare centre, can their family expect to find that out, or how long will that take?
I might ask Roger to comment on the detail of that.
Look, thanks. When it comes to missing people, police take the lead with that, and it is well coordinated with local civil defence as required. But they have systems set up that's pre-arranged, and in previous natural disasters and flooding and earthquake events, police provide that service. So if people do have concerns, please go there. Civil defence will support. But it's important that we allow our lead agencies to fulfil their roles in these circumstances.
For the housing minister, I was wondering if you've received any advice on or know how many emergency housing places might have been affected by the cyclone.
Yes, so in terms of the East Coast, we're still waiting for full data to come through there as communications are re-established. In terms of Auckland, this is something we've been able to do far greater assessments of, both across our public housing and our emergency housing, and actually at the moment that number is relatively small, but as I said, we're still waiting to complete a full picture of what the situation on the East Coast is, and that will become clearer, I think, over the coming hours.
Prime Minister,
okay, we will wrap up shortly, but as we have been, we'll be providing more regular updates, so this is not the last opportunity to ask questions, but we do need to be able to go and collect some more information, so I will take the last few questions.
Are you in a position to confirm that the child that was found just after 2 o'clock was 3 years old?
No, I'm sorry, I'm not in a position to be able to confirm that. There is some conflicting information around that, though, so I just encourage people to be a bit cautious about information that might be in the public domain until it's been properly confirmed.
Of the 9,000, of the 9,000 people who are displaced in Hawke's Bay, how many are RSC workers?
Sorry, I don't have that information.
And it looks like it's going to be whipping around to Marlborough soon. From what's happened on the East Coast, how worried are you about that, and what should people then do?
My understanding is that the cyclone has moved off, but there is other weather that we are expecting, and we're expecting some heavy weather in parts of the country, and so people just need to follow the Met Services guidance around that.
Big increase in the number of Defence Force personnel, I think from 200 up to 700 today. Is that because they've been able to get into areas that number's gone up, or is it because the scale of the cyclone is sort of...
Combination of both.
Right.
So obviously as the need becomes clearer, the Defence Force are very good at tasking people to do the work required very quickly, and as they've been doing that, of course the number of people involved has increased.
And would you expect more and more Defence Force personnel to keep being brought in as we get more access into...
It will really depend on what the tasks are that we're asking them to do and the available resource that they have to do those particular tasks. But clearly it's the number one priority for them at the moment. They're pulling out all the stops to provide as much support as they possibly can.
You said the Defence Force reconnaissance flights over Estelle had returned some concerning elements. Could you explain the nature of that?
No, I haven't had more detailed reports than that.
Just on drinking water, do we know exactly which districts in particular don't have safe drinking water at the moment? You were talking about bringing in water filters and things. Do we know which districts exactly are involved in that, and also how long it might be before that situation resolves itself?
My understanding is Gisborne and Wairoa clearly are areas of concern. And so in the case of Gisborne, people are being asked to conserve fresh water. Help is on the way there to increase the supply of fresh water. In the case of Wairoa, obviously we're trying to get fresh water in there, so bottled water is on its way.
But that's could be weeks that dealing with bottled water situation?
Look, I wouldn't want to speculate on that, but they'll be working as fast as they can to get the infrastructure up and running again.
Just on Wairoa, do you know what's going on with Bali?
No, sorry, I don't know. I don't know the menu. But well, that might be a good opportunity to wrap up. That's it, as we've got to that territory. But thank you very much, everyone. We will provide more updates again tomorrow. Thanks.